Bonjour, Tangi, and welcome, folks, to a very special edition of Metis Time Capsule. I'm starting a new series called Metis Trailblazers. You're, of course, with your host, Alexandria Anthony. And the Metis Trailblazers series really celebrates the strength, courage, spirit, and story of the birth of a proud Métis nation. These Métis trailblazers, they're just not heroes, folks. They were healers, leaders, warriors, and visionaries who really carried the flame of kinship, resistance, and community right across the Prairie Winds. Bound by the Sash, the Fiddle, the Red River Cart, and the river, the Métis people truly have endured hardship, injustice, and even exile. And yet, through all of this, we have stood proud and tall in who we are as Métis people. Um, their resistance is really woven into every thread of the land, every story that is passed down from Métis ancestor to child. Really, Métis Trailblazers is going to celebrate and share Métis people who really have set the stage. They've set the very firm foundations for a proud and powerful Métis nation. And this series honors the Métis Trailblazers, the Métis ancestors who have walked ahead so that future Métis generations could walk and stand proud. We are the people of the bison hunt. We are the river's voice and the prairie's heart. And we are still here, folks. Before we get our sashes in a knot and people get upset, this Metis Trailblazer series, I'm going to showcase or feature 5 Metis Trailblazers in an episode. And I will invite you to further explore, dig deeper into these amazing Metis Trailblazers. And let's face it, folks, a Metis Trailblazers list would not be complete without a number one Cuthbert Grant Jr., who is our number one Métis trailblazer, and he really was born into the fur trade. And Cuthbert Grant Jr. was born circa 1793 in Fort de la Riviere, Tremblay, Saskatchewan. And his father was, of course, Cuthbert Grant Sr., who was a Northwest Company partner. And unfortunately, Cuthbert Grant Jr. passed away tragically July 15th, 1854, as a result from a fall of a horse at Granttown, White Horse Plains, or as it's now known as St. Francois Xavier in Manitoba. And you're probably scratching your head trying to adjust your Métis sash and saying, well, why is Cuthbert Grant Jr. so important? Well, we're going to get into it right now, folks. Cuthbert Grant really, in 1812, entered into the service of the Northwest Company at the age of around 19 years old. And he became involved in the very bitter struggle between the Nor'westers and the Hudson Bay Company. As a result, the Pemmican Proclamation, where you have a settler, someone that is not Métis, is telling you now that you can't have your way of life. You can't have pemmican. You can't feed your people. So that's really a slap in the sash there when you're telling people they can't be who they are. So again, the bitter struggle ensued between the Nor'westers and the Hudson Bay Company. That really brought into play the huge, and this is a real pinnacle point in Métis history, is the Métis victory, the victory at Frog Plain in 1816, or as other people may know it as the Battle of Seven Oaks, folks. And at this point, Cuthbert Grant, he really truly ignited in the minds of the Métis people the concept of a Métis nation. And in 1825, of course, wheat also was becoming an important food crop. And it's interesting to note as well that the Hudson Bay Company named him Warden of the Plains in 1828. But 4 years prior to that, in 1824, he, of course, founded Granttown, which is now, of course, St. Francis Xavier. And Cuthbert Grant, this is key, folks. Cuthbert Grant was the first to undertake the construction of a water mill in Western Canada, and his mill was completed on Sturgeon Creek, in which is now Winnipeg, Manitoba, in 1829. We did say that, of course, wheat was becoming a very important food crop. This is all, the buffalo are beginning to, of course, diminish, so wheat is becoming big. Also, in 1835, he was appointed as Justice of the Peace for Assiniboia's 4th District. And in 1839, he joined the Council of Assiniboia and became one of Assiniboia's 2 sheriffs, also the Captain General of the Buffalo Hunt. Also, another key point is he was the first to practice modern medicine on his people. And it has been told that Cuthbert Grant Jr. went on horseback with his daughter Maria with his medicine chest in tow. So very, very important, very concerned about the welfare of his Métis people. And if you get a chance, if you're in Winnipeg, Manitoba, stop by the Manitoba Museum of Man and Nature. They do have on display Cuthbert Grant Jr.'s medicine chest circa 1826. Take a look, and you're really looking at a glimpse of history. So, as we've stated at the beginning, in 1854, Cuthbert Grant was injured in a fall from his horse, and July 15th, 1854, he succumbed from his injuries. And very influential person in Métis history, really to ignite, to fan the flames of a Métis nation, the concept, the identity of a Métis nation. Of course, riding into victory, the victory of Frog Plain, again, for the rights of the Métis people to exist, for the rights of the Métis people to have their lifestyle, their livelihood. So again, being born into the fur trade, his father, Cuthbert Grant Sr., was a Northwest Company partner. Cuthbert Grant was employed by them as well for a time, and then again he was employed by the Hudson Bay Company when they named him Warden of the Plains in 1828. Another key point in significance, myself being a descendant of Cuthbert Grant Jr., I was always perplexed. There's 2 historical accounts on where the body of Cuthbert Grant Jr. exists, where he lays. We can't get a definite answer by any source on where his body, and as a descendant and as somebody that played such a key role in the formation of the Métis Nation, this certainly didn't sit well with me at all. So myself and other Cuthbert Grant Jr. descendants came together and we raised the money to have a beautiful black granite marker of Cuthbert Grant Jr. At least somewhere we could pay homage, somewhere we could visit and pay our respects. And we did get permission from the Roman Catholic Archdiocese, the St. Francis Xavier Parish, to have it placed by his daughter in the cemetery. And you'll notice if you visit that marker in St. Francis Xavier, it's dedicated in his honor by his descendants and also the Soul Cudbright. And again, like I said, it's beside his daughter Maria Grant and her husband Pascal Brilon. So very key, important person in the foundations of a strong and united Métis nation. And now we're going to come into our second Métis trailblazer, and this is Pierre Falcon. And Pierre Falcon, of course, was Cuthbert Grant Jr.'s brother-in-law, also known as Chinami, and he is the Métis songwriter who helped forge a Métis identity. Very, very important. He was born June 4th, 1793, at Fort Lacoude, Elbow Fort in the Swan River District, and he did pass away October 21st, 1876, and he's passed away at St. Francis Xavier in Manitoba. So, Perici, Pierre the Rhymer, of course, a celebrated composer, a poet, author, fur trader, and farmer. His songs, like the iconic La Chasse du Grand, captured the spirit of Métis resistance, Métis pride, and Métis culture. In 1805, at age 15, Falcon came back to Manitoba and became a clerk for the Northwest Company. And he did get married, of course, in 1812. He married this Marie, the sister of Cuthbert Grant Jr. Also, one of his sons, Jean-Baptiste Falcon, led the St. Francois Xavier White Horse Plain group of buffalo hunters in 1851 and defeated and defended. He actually defended the camp from the Sioux at the Battle of Grand Coteau in North Dakota. In 1816, Pierre Falcon, then aged 23, celebrated the victory at Frog Plain in his song La Chance de la Guenois. Very important song. Falcon continued to work for the Northwest Company until its merger with the Hudson Bay Company in 1821, and Falcon served with the Hudson Bay Company until 1825, when his family, along with several other Métis families, settled in Granttown under the leadership of his brother-in-law, Cuthbert Grant Jr. In 1855, Pierre Falcon became a local magistrate. Through music and storytelling, Falcon really helped to shape a shared Métis identity that was critical. It was just during a critical time in Métis history. And Songs of Old Manitoba by Margaret Arnault MacLeod contains some of Pierre Falcon's songs. And of course, La Chance de la Guenois. Another one is Lord Selkirk at Fort William, the Dixon Song, and of course, Misfortunes of an Unlucky King. Falcon Lake in Manitoba is said to be named after Pierre Falcon, and you can see that it does appear on the Palliser map of 1865. So again, Pierre Falcon, our number 2 Métis Trailblazers, a very important person in setting the stage, the firm foundation of a strong Métis nation. Now, our number 3 trailblazer, of course, is Louis Riel, who is the founder of Manitoba and also the honorary first premier of Manitoba. Louis Riel was born October 22nd, 1844, at St. Boniface in the Red River settlement, and unfortunately, he was unjustly hung at Regina November 16th, 1885. Louis Riel, of course, was the first child of Louis Riel Sr. and Julie Lagimodiere, and his mother was the 7th child of Jean-Baptiste Lagimodiere and Marie Anne Gatbury, who came from Quebec to settle in the Northwest in 1806. At age 10, Louis Riel began his education, eventually studying at the school run by the Catholic Brothers established in the settlement in 1854. Bishop Taché sent him to Montreal in 1858 along with Daniel McDougall and Louis Schmidt to continue his schooling. In Montreal, Louis was admitted, of course, to the College du Montreal. At a time, he was overwhelmed by the grief. He was overwhelmed by grief by the death of his father, January 1864. And in March 1865, finding its regulations too restrictive, he left the College du Montreal. He then arrived in St. Boniface on July 26, 1868, after 10 years, an educated but unemployed young man. And at the time of his return to the Red River settlement, Canada at that time included the provinces of Quebec, Ontario, and New Brunswick. The territory known as Rupert's Land, which extended west from Ontario all the way to the Rocky Mountains, belonged to the Hudson Bay Company. During the summer of 1869, the Canadian government sent John Stoughton Dennis to Red River to begin to start to survey the land, and he, of course, was badly received by the Métis, no doubt about that. And when Dennis arrived in Fort Garry, opposition really broke out at that time, and on October 11th, 1869, proclaiming that the Canadian government had no right to act without permission, 16 Métis, led by Riel, stopped a crew of surveyors on the property of Riel's cousin, André Nault. And this is a very, very important first act of resistance to the transfer of the settlement to Canada, and second, it established Riel as the champion of the Métis. October 16th, 1869, Riel was elected Secretary of the Métis National Committee, and John Bruce was elected President. November 23rd, 1869, Riel proposed the formation of a provisional government to replace the Council of Assiniboia. And the official transfer of the land to Canada had been set for December 1st, 1869. On December 10th, 1869, Riel's provisional government flag flew on the flagpole at Fort Garry. December 27th, 1869, after John Bruce resigned, Riel became president of the provisional government. January 9th, 1870, 12 prisoners, including Charles Mair and Thomas Scott, escaped from the fort. And on February 18th, 1870, after causing problems and attempting to escape, Thomas Scott was summoned to appear before a Métis court-martial formed in accordance with the custom of the buffalo hunt and presided over by Ambrose Lépine. 7 members, of course, of the court found him guilty of defying the authority of the provisional government, of fighting with guards, and insulting the president. He was sentenced, of course, to death. March 4th, 1870, Scott, of course, was executed by a firing squad. May 12th, 1870, the Manitoba Act, based on the Métis List of Rights, was passed by the Canadian Parliament. Wolseley's troops arrived before Archibald. They were supposed to restore order and keep the peace, and of course a number of soldiers wanted to seek out Riel and avenge the death of Scott. And Louis Riel, of course, was warned of their intentions, and Riel, Lepine, and O'Donnell flew to the United States, of course, for sanctuary. Louis Riel at that time went to the Métis settlement of St. Joseph in Dakota Territory. At this time, folks, life in Manitoba was changing. Since 1879, he really had followed the buffalo hunt and worked as an agent, trader, woodcutter near Carroll in Montana Territory. He at that time met Marguerite Monet dit Belleum, whom he married on à la Folk Le Payon on April 28th, 1881. Riel took an interest, of course, at this time, being in the United States in American politics, and he did become an American citizen at that time. And he also became a schoolmaster, which is quite interesting. June 4th, 1884, a mass was ending in St. Peter's Mission on the Sun River, Montana, and at this particular time, Riel received 4 visitors: Gabriel Dumont, Moisey Olet, Michel Dumas, and James Zibister. They had come to ask Louis Riel to lead the Métis once again. The Métis way of life was being threatened by the continual influx of settlers and immigrants. July 8th, 1884, Riel and his wife and 2 children arrived at Batoche in Saskatchewan. At this time, folks, Métis nations and the First Nations and the Métis were dying of starvation, and the settlers, of course, they wanted land issues resolved. So there was conflict going on with First Nations and Métis people starving, and the settlers, they wanted all these land claims to be settled. They had had enough. So petitions were sent to Ottawa, and in spite of the support that Louis Riel received from the Métis, there was still an anti-Riel feeling that was prevailing among the Catholic clergy. And the clergy at this time feared Louis Riel's power, and they were really suspicious of his religious beliefs. And led by Father Andre, the clergy, they tried to kick out Riel as the Métis leader, but thankfully they were unsuccessful. So there was turmoil at this time going on between the Catholic clergy and Riel. They were afraid of his power. He held power with the Métis people, and some church officials they don't like people around that have power over them. They become a threat. And at this time in history, Louis Riel was he was a threat to them. February 11th, 1885, the federal government answered the petition that was sent on December 16th, and they, of course, promised to appoint a commission to investigate the Métis claims and titles. And really seeing that nothing had been accomplished yet, Riel asked the Métis if they wanted him to continue to be their leader. And again, at this time, forsaken by their priests, the Métis reaffirmed their vision of Riel as a leader and a prophet. So they really wanted Riel back in their corner. And over the winter of 1885, tensions were really mounting again amongst First Nations as they were again falling victim to extreme hunger and disease. And the government agents failed to provide the resources that were really necessary to help relieve their suffering. So they really did nothing to help them. They were sitting by and watching the First Nations starved to death. First Nations at this time began to really realize, they thought about it, they realized that their situation was indeed similar to the situation that was occurring to the Métis people at this time. And it was only natural, folks, that they also would turn to Louis Riel for answers. And again, fighting broke out at Duck Lake on March 26, 1885. After 40 minutes, with his force decimated, totally annihilated, Crozier gave the orders to retreat. So that was a victory for the Métis, because the government forces, of course, were decimated, they were annihilated. And this battle really made the First Nation and the Métis people that they realized that the Canadians were indeed not invincible. With Gabriel Dumont in command at the Battle of Fish Creek, it ended, of course, in a stalemate. On May 12, 1885, on the fourth day of the Battle of Batoche, the Métis were sadly defeated. They ran out of ammo. There was a lot of causes. I invite you to explore more the Battle of Batoche and what happened to Métis people there at this specific battle. And this is key. Louis Riel, only after ensuring the safety of his family, he withdrew into the woods to pray. He made no attempt to flee. After his surrender, Louis Riel was taken to, of course, Regina. And after Gabriel Dumont heard of Riel's surrender, he fled to the United States with Michel Dumas. On July 6, 1885, Louis Riel was charged with high treason, and the sad reality, folks, and really discrimination, colonialism at its finest, the jury was entirely Anglo-Saxon and Protestant. So you tell me, was that a fair trial? I think not. Again, sadly, Louis Riel was executed by hanging on November 16, 1885 in Regina, and his body was then transported to St. Boniface in Winnipeg. And again, Louis Riel, really a true leader of the Métis people, really putting the rights and the needs of the Métis people first, trying to fight for their rights. Certainly was not a rebel. He was not a tyrant. He was not all these names that colonial individuals call him. I don't think an individual fighting for the rights of his people to exist, to hunt, etc., is a rebel, is anybody that a 13th century obscure British law should have been used to hang him for high treason. In 2016, the government of Manitoba recognized Riel as the first leader of Manitoba, and most importantly, in 2023, the government of Manitoba, through the Louis Riel Act, granted the honorary title of the first Premier of Manitoba on Louis Riel. So such, again, another important Métis trailblazer to set the stage, the firm foundation of a strong Métis nation, and each having their roles in time, their role in history to play, very, very important individuals. Now we move to number 4, Métis Trailblazer, and of course it is Gabriel Dumont, very important person. He was born December 1837, Red River Settlement, died, of course, May 19th, 1906 in Bellevue, Saskatchewan. He did marry Madeline Wilkie in 1858. So, as a Métis trailblazer, Gabrielle Dumont, of course, was a Métis leader, a buffalo hunter, a guide, and a real military commander, a military genius. And he played such a key role in the Northwest resistance in 1885 as, of course, a military leader and a friend and ally of Louis Riel. Highly skilled in horseback riding, marksmanship, and he could speak multiple languages. And Dumont fought for decades for the economic prosperity and political independence of the Métis people. You're going to see a theme here, folks, in these Métis trailblazers that we've covered, where they are fighting for economic prosperity, for the Métis people, independence for the rights of the Métis people. So they all had their own style, their own fashion, made their own mark on Métis history. All the common denominator, of course, the rights for the Métis people. And of course, Dumont was the eldest son of Métis hunter Isidore Dumont and the grandson of French-Canadian voyageur Jean-Baptiste Dumont. So again, you can see the fur trade lines through a lot of the trailblazers. You know, children, they are of the fur trade. It has been said, of course, that Gabrielle Dumont could converse in Michif, Blackfoot, Sioux, Cree, Crow, and of course French. And it has been said that he never learned more than a few words in English. He also was a very excellent, of course, marksman with the bow and the rifle. In 1851, at age 13, Dumont was really introduced into plains warfare when he fought at the Battle of Grand Couteau in North Dakota. In 1863, his skill as a buffalo hunter led to his election as Hunt Chief of the Saskatchewan Métis, a role he maintained until around 1881. Dumont took no direct part in the Red River Resistance of 1869-1870, although he did rush to Fort Garry to offer military assistance to resist Colonel Wolseley's expeditionary force. During the 1870s and the 1880s, he owned a farm and operated a ferry at Gabrielle's Crossing near a place on the South Saskatchewan River. On December 10th, 1873, Dumont called a meeting to form a new government for the Métis settlement of St. Laurent on the South Saskatchewan River, and a Métis government that was based on the buffalo hunt. Dumont and his council sent several petitions to Ottawa in the early 1880s, insisting that Parliament recognize their land holdings and include river lots in the Dominion Survey of the West. And of course, having received no official response, Dumont and several of his councillors decided in March 1884 to approach Louis Riel, whom the Métis considered an expert on dealing with the Canadian, dealing with the colonial government. A delegation was dispatched 2 months later to request Riel to travel to Saskatchewan to advise the people there on how to protect their lands and their freedoms. So Dumont traveled to the Montana Territory with 3 others and convinced Riel to leave the United States to travel to Saskatchewan. Dumont and Riel developed a very close friendship from that point on. March 1885, as Métis attempts to really negotiate with the Dominion government had still gone unanswered. Dumont called a general meeting of the St. Laurent Métis at Batoche. Several of the Métis present suggested taking up arms to defend their lands against Canadian settlement. When this meeting resolved, resolved to form a new, when this meeting ended, they resolved to form a new provisional government, the Provisional Government of Saskatchewan, in order to negotiate with Canada and to again defend Métis lands. Dumont, of course, was chosen as the adjutant general, organizing about 300 Métis soldiers in the same manner as the buffalo hunt. So taking the style on how you organize for the buffalo hunt, that was his premise on how he was going to attack this problem. Rumors circulated that the Métis planned to attack Fort Carlton, and the Northwest Mounted Police were dispatched to really squash the Métis government. And the Métis organized, of course, a defense and met with the Northwest Mounted Police near Duck Lake on March 26, 1885. And during a parley with the Northwest Mounted Police, um, uh, an unarmed Cree man was killed, and Gabriel Dumont's brother Isidore, you know, he was killed. The Métis returned the fire, of course, and many Métis maintain that this battle was fought in self-defense. I can clearly see that, and Dumont, of course, was shot in the head during the battle, the bullet glancing off his skull, and he nursed this injury during the rest of the Northwest resistance, but it did not prevent him from leading his soldiers. So here you have Gabriel Dumont shot in the head, the bullet glancing off his skull, and he's still going to lead his soldiers into battle. Very incredible. Dumont's militia fought Canadian soldiers at Fish Creek on April 24th, initially stunning the inexperienced force and causing Middleton to delay his advance towards Batoche. At Batoche, Dumont led a spirited 4-day defense between May 9th and 12th in 1885. And on the fourth day, when the Métis were again out of ammunition and were shooting nails and scrap metal, the Canadians broke through their lines. So here you have, even though the Métis had run out of bullets, had run out of ammunition, they're taking what they can find. They're taking nails and scrap metal to try and defend themselves. Batoche was sacked, and Dumont was forced into hiding. Dumont remained in the Batoche area for a few days after it fell. He was, of course, distributing blankets to the many displaced Métis women and children and making sure that they were safe from harm. So here you have a man, a military man, that is staying behind after Batoche is sacked to make sure that displaced Métis women and children had blankets. Incredible. He searched for Riel, whom had surrendered before Dumont could find him. And when Dumont heard Riel was in custody, Dumont left for the United States. It has been rumored that Dumont was mounting a daring rescue mission during Riel's trial in Regina, which had kept Riel's guards on very high alert. It was also said that when Dumont was in hiding, soldiers looking for him they kind of made little attempt. They didn't really go out of their way to try and find Dumont after they learnt that he was armed with his famed rifle Le Petit. So that's a very famous rifle. Upon arriving in the United States, Dumont and Michel Dumas were detained, but local authorities shortly received a communique from the Oval Office ordering their release. That seems a little weird, a little odd. The Canadian government, of course, never requested Dumont's extradition back to Canada. In July 1886, the Canadian government announced amnesty for Dumont, and Dumont was then recruited by Buffalo Bill during to try and he wanted him to join his show as a performer. He did, but his time with the show was very short-lived. He did return to Canada, and he continued to advocate and for the rights of the Métis people. In 1903, Dumont dictated his memoirs to a group of friends, and the 103-page manuscript remained unseen and unpublished in the Manitoba Provincial Archives until Michael Barnholden discovered them in 1971. Can you imagine? From 1903 to 1971, Gabriel Dumont's manuscript remained unseen and unpublished in the Manitoba Provincial Archives. It was translated into English from a mixture of French and Michif and published by Barnholden as Gabriel Dumont Speaks in 2009. So I invite you to check out that book, Gabriel Dumont Speaks. Gabriel Dumont's wife, Madeline, of course, died of tuberculosis in 1886, and Gabriel Dumont died of congestive heart failure on May 19, 1906 in Bellevue, Saskatchewan. Gabriel Dumont's legacy among Métis trailblazers, Métis leaders, is second in importance only to Louis Riel, and in my mind also Cuthbert Grant Jr. Again, they all had their place and time in Métis history. For many Métis, Dumont represents the very best of Métis culture. He was a fighter and warrior, but was ultimately driven by an overriding concern for his people's welfare. In 1981, of course, Gabriel Dumont was made a National Historic Person. So again, another important Métis trailblazer to set the stage, the firm foundation of a strong and proud Métis nation. Now we come into our fifth Métis trailblazer in this episode, and it is Mathilda Davis. And she was born, of course, in 1820, St. Andrews in the Red River settlement in Manitoba. She died 1873. Her parents were Anne, sometimes called Nancy Hodgson, and John Davis. And Anne was the daughter of a Cree woman, and John Hodgson was the chief factor at Fort Albany. So you can clearly see in this Métis trailblazer, Mathilda Davis, another fur trade connection. The fur trade is like the Red River. It goes right through, it goes through us Métis people. She did travel to England in 1822 with her father and her sister Elizabeth, and there she received a formal English education and served as a governess to some of England's prominent families. And after the death of her father and sister, she did return to the Red River settlement. Upon her return to the Red River settlement, she began to devote her entire life to teaching, to education. During her time as an educator, and of course, with the assistance of very influential citizens in the Red River settlement, Hudson Bay Company families, and Dr. John Bunn, a doctor for, of course, the Hudson Bay Company, a school for girls was established in the Red River settlement in 1840. The school was first located in It was located in a frame house in St. Andrews, which was owned, of course, by Davis's brother, Hudson Bay, on a Hudson Bay, who also was a Hudson Bay employee at Lower Fort Garry. In 1858, a stone house was built in front of the wooden one, which is still standing to this day. Of course, the Hudson Bay Company provided some assistance for the school, and students did pay fees. Uh, Full board and instruction in English, French, and music was around $132 per annum. Weekly board and instruction was $105. Day students who received, of course, lunch at the school at the time was $50. Miss Davis was also assisted by several prominent women in the colony with her teaching. So very prominent women in the Red River settlement assisted her with her teaching. Arduous household chores necessitated early rising at 4 a.m. to, of course, light the inevitable Karen stove, carry water, and milk the cows. The school was officially named Oakfield, but was usually known as the Mathilda Davis School Academy or Academy. The school received positive support, including from members of the local clergy, all of who were really looking at this particular time for alternatives to sending their children overseas to England, and they favored Miss Davis's position as a young unmarried woman with an English education and strong family connection, of course, to the Hudson Bay Company. The school boarded up to 40 students at a time. As the main provider of an English education that might actually elevate its students' social standing, Mathilda Davis was a powerful force in the social fabric of the Red River settlement at that time. Mathilda taught until her death in 1873 at St. Andrews. In the book, Women of Red River, one of Mathilda Davis's former students remembers that Davis was a devoted teacher who held her students in high regard and took care of them well, and that her students stood out among others due to their straight postures and gentle manners. The name Mathilda Davis will truly be long remembered in the Red River settlement for the pioneer educational work she did, and she truly loved so well. After the Davis family vacated the site in the late 19th century, the building was sold, and in 1936 it was purchased by a businessman, John Curtis Harrington Eddy, who named it Twin Oaks for a pair of oak trees on the property. So truly a remarkable Métis woman, Mathilda Davis, an educator, a trailblazer, a Métis trailblazer in education in the Red River settlement at that time, and of course, strong ties to the Hudson Bay Company. I hope you have found my new Metis Trailblazer series informative and you enjoyed it. I'm going to continue this series. We've only showcased 5 of Metis Trailblazer. There's going to be much more, and I invite you to explore these people, dig deeper, learn more about these Metis Trailblazers who have set the firm foundations of a strong and proud Métis Nation. Until next time, Métis people, keep trailblazing yourself, and I hope you enjoyed this new series. Take care.